Hello and welcome to a special transmission of Muharram ul Haram today with Fatma Shaheen on PTP World on the show The Society. Now when we talk about this sacred month, we must all understand the fact that it is that one month in which we are told to make an extra effort to do good deeds and at the same time steer clear of sinning. Why is that the case? This is what we'll be talking about in our today's show. We'll be talking about the significance of this very sacred month. We'll also be talking about the incident of Karbala, which of course we all associate with this very month. We'll be talking about the important lessons which we learn as Muslims from the very tragedy of Karbala. And in this regard, how applicable, how relevant are these lessons in the society today? This and much more to follow on today's show. And to talk about these very important things, I have with me an extremely distinguished, rather very learned panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Sheikh Jahangir Saab, who is an Islamic scholar. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. Alongside him, I have Dr. Muhammad Saeed Akhtar Saab, who is also Islamic scholar alongside being an educationist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam.
So now to get the conversation started with you, when we talk about this sacred month of Muharram, why is it so important? Why is it given that, importance in the sense that, we are told to do, good deeds within this month and also, of course, to steer clear of sinning too. And of course, this goes without saying that it is also that one month in which we are told to abstain from warfare.
Well, the month of Muharram, it's called Muharram al-Haram. And from Haram, it means the hurma or the sanctity of the month. It's a sacred month. And it's one of those sacred months in which people would not fight.
Right.
And they would hold sacred and deem sacred this particular month because it has been special from time immemorial. It is the 10th of Muharram. It is believed on the day that Adam alayhi salam was born, the day he was forgiven for his mistake,
right,
and the day he was sent down. And many of the prophets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent on this earth, many of them had the special day. For example,
right,
Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was given the title of Khalilullah, or the Khalil, the friend of Allah. It was announced on the 10th of Muharram. Musa alayhi salam was given relief by being given this getaway from the Pharaoh on the 10th of Muharram.
Right.
And of course, the very precious and invaluable personality of Sayyidina Hussein anhu and his family, that great tragedy also occurred on the 10th of Muharram.
Right. On which, sir, I'll come to you when we talk about the incident of Karbala. I think it's very important for us not only to just talk about the incident and the tragedy of Karbala, so to speak, but also to, talk about the incidents which, actually led up to that. So for the clarification of the audience, would you be kind enough to explain, the historical and the factual background of the same?
After Khilafat-e-Rashida, there was a period of turmoil in the history of Islam. And first of all, I should clarify that we should not be disappointed. It is a universal fact that after a revolution comes, there are internal differences among the revolutionary party.
Right.
And they are natural. When they come to settle the system, there is difference of opinion. These differences emerged and they created some turmoil as well, and I won't go into the details of that. That was characteristic of the day that the events took that particular shape.
Right.
Otherwise, maybe the state of affairs have been different if these were the present days. After that turmoil, Hazrat Hassan Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu, that had he had reconciliation with Hazrat Amir Muawiyah, and there was peaceful continuity of the system for about 19 years. And then the state of affairs turned into confusion or commotion when Hazrat Amir Muawiyah left the world, and there were differences of opinion on the nomination of Yazid.
Right.
Hazrat Imam Hussain wanted to talk to Yazid, and he did not go for war.
Right.
He did not aim to have war with him. He wanted to negotiate, but the political state of affairs was such that he was not given the chance to meet him and settle the affairs.
Right, sir. But sir, coming to you in that regard, I think we must also talk about, the political significance of course, the sacrifice of Hazrat Imam Hussain alayhi salam. When we talk about it, and when we, of course, look back and when we see it in a very holistic kind of a manner. So at the end of the day, why do you feel is this sacrifice so important, not only in saving Islam, but also in cementing it and till date glorifying it?
Well, with your permission, Fatma, before I go into the sacrifice and the ultimate sacrifice given by Sayyidina Hussain radiallahu anhu and his family, I would elaborate a bit more about the political background that was happening at the time. I think Dr. Saab very beautifully said that we must understand this in the context it happened.
Right, sir.
So I would also ask our viewers to remember that when they give some time to the study of Islam, they must also give some time to understanding things happening in a certain context 14 centuries ago.
Right.
Because today we have a different world altogether. And having said that, this political scenario that Dr. Saab so eloquently spoke about, we must understand, and I take cue from your sentence, when you mentioned it was not a clash of the personalities. It was a clash of two systems.
Right, sir.
It was a clash primarily of two opinions, absolutely apart, absolutely conflicting, in which the right of the individual to protest against the state was being established. And in order to register that protest, and when we know that the ultimate sacrifice was made.
Of course.
And what the exactly conflict was, as we all understand and we all agree on this, that on his way out, the preceding caliph, he appointed his son as the successor. And herein lied the problem.
Right.
That people would say that why would a person be allowed, a caliph of the Muslims or the ruler of the Muslims, is he allowed to appoint his own child as his successor or not?
Right.
Now, this had been established as a precedent by the fifth caliph as well. But it was not a matter of just appointing the son.
Right.
It was a matter of appointing the best person for the job.
Right, sir. On which, sir, I'll come to you. I think we must also talk about this whole concept of martyrdom and what exactly does it entail, because from what we understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it also relates with the concept of jihad at some level.
Martyrdom is basically sacrifice. When you sacrifice your life for a certain ideology, that is martyrdom. It sublimates the person who sacrifices on the one hand and gives an enlightenment and light for the future generations as well, the contemporary people and the coming generations both. And this is kind of operation running in this universe. As a law of nature, you can observe that when a seed is sown in the soil, it gets its life extinguished. It sacrifices itself and it gets sublimation to a higher status of plant. And when plants sacrifice, it is sublimated as well, and it gets a higher status of animals. And when animals sacrifice themselves, they still get a higher status, that is of humans.
Right.
They become part of humans. And when humans sacrifice themselves, they get again a higher status. And what is their status? Yas'alunaka anir ruh qulir ruhu min amri rabbi. They get that status of amri rabbi. And this is sacrifice. This sublimation is martyrdom.
In simple terms, if we were to put it, I think for the clarification of the audience, then that what all would be included in it? Is it just, giving your life for a greater cause, for the cause of Allah on the battlefield, or would it also include, other instances where people, end up losing their lives?
Yes, but this sacrifice must be linked with an ideology.
Right, sir.
Otherwise, it will become futile. And when it is connected with an ideology, that leaves an enlightenment to the contemporary people and the peoples in the coming times. The person who sacrifices his life, that gives an evidence, shahadat means evidence,
Right.
that gives an evidence through his practice that this is the reality for which life can be sacrificed, and people come to know the reality of the state of affairs, the reality of the phenomenon.
Right.
And then they are linked with that ideology. There is centrality for the people to get connected with that and to organize their thoughts and practices with that ideology. And the nations, the societies, they get intellectually organized and practically organized to create a system. Basically, all sacrifices are for uplift of humanity. This sublimation is not meant for the individual. This is meant for sublimation of humanity. You have to uplift humanity in this world and in the life hereafter.
Right. On which, sir, I'll come to you. I think we must also talk about, the fact that we can't ignore the fact that we all live in turbulent times, in an era, of course, where we have to go through, different kinds of disaster and conflict. So when we talk about the message of Karbala, a very important message that we all learned was to fight against oppression, to, actually raise our voices against injustice. How practically do you see this being applied today? Because we do see Muslims being oppressed in different parts of the world.
Well, the reason why we believe as Muslims we've come into this world or live on the earth is so that we can live our lives for what is true and just.
Right, sir.
So the Quran repeatedly asks Muslims to stand up what is true and just, and that's not just at any special moment of our lives, but to every day of our lives. So we need to, as Muslims, to stand up for what is right and just, the way Sayyidina Hussain, he stood up, and without a care for his own person and whatever the price,
Right.
he stood for what is just and right. And hence, like Dr. Saab said, that he became the example, the living example for the ultimate sacrifice. Now, he is not the only martyr in Muslim history.
Of course.
And yet he became the gold standard, as they say,
Right.
of sacrifice. Because the kind of price that he paid as an individual, as the head of the family, and this is not a normal or ordinary individual.
Of course.
He is the grandson of the greatest individual, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he is a person of great piety and knowledge, and of course amal on good deeds, of acting on good deeds. So today when we speak for every human being,
Right.
Sayyidina Hussain presents the example for standing up for what is true and just for every human being on this earth.
Right, sir. On which, sir, I'll come to you. I think in this regard, we must also talk about societal reform, more particularly, what kind of changes can we actually aspire to bring in our society after, the lessons that we have learned from Karbala in terms of, exercising more patience, in terms of not taking everything for granted, in terms of just being, more compassionate.
If we look into the case of the prophets' advent, all the prophets and Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came to eliminate oppressive systems from the world. They acted locally, and their message afterwards came to the world as well, practically. Oppressive systems, they are a hindrance between mankind and God. Unless you terminate, unless you eliminate these systems, humanity cannot come nearer to God. So the first mission of the prophets has been to abolish these systems, unfair social, economic and political systems from the world. The same training Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave to the Sahaba Ikram Raziyallahu Anhum. Khulafai Rashidin carried this mission to the world.
Right.
They practically established that system. The same mission was taken by Aimma Ahle Bayt, and they fought for that. So the first point that has to be noted for our youth, that is, they must get insight into the systems of the world
Right.
and how they can change that system. and their concentration must be global, act local and think global.
Sir, coming to you, when we talk about, Ashura, when we talk about the month of Muharram, I think we must also talk about the fact that, we have varied sources from which we learn different things. So when it comes to, basically resorting to different sources, how can we practically ensure that, the information that we get is accurate?
I think that's a very important point, which is not just with regards to Karbala itself, but also to many other aspects of our lives and religion. I think that it's so sad that Muslims from around the world need to understand the beauty and the knowledge that is in the diversity of understanding one particular heading or topic or incident from different angles.
Right, sir.
I think that the fact that we have a diverse opinion ought to help us attain a 360-degree level of understanding.
Right.
While we agree on 98% of everything and we disagree on 2%, and that disagreement need not turn out to be a conflict, because a disagreement is something else and a conflict is something else. We need to focus on the 98% of our lives.
Right.
We need to focus on the 98% of our beliefs, which are common to all. In fact, most of those things are common to humanity itself.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which, sir, I'll come to you. I think it's also important in light of what, he said, that when we talk about awareness, when we talk about enlightening ourselves, that too, of course, with accurate information, I think it's also very equally important that we, then shun out all the misinformation like we do generally for other things in life as well. So when we talk about, doing away or guarding ourselves against the most common misconceptions, how particularly do you feel can we do so, more particularly in the context of the incident of Karbala and other things which might be attached with it?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that the system that was created by the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that was abolished after Khilafat-e-Rashida, and if something was left, that was extinguished after the Karbala incident. This is a very detrimental misconception.
Right, sir.
I must pronounce that the system of Islam that the Holy Prophet ﷺ created continued for 1000 years in the world. It was a system that was, as I just said, created by the Holy Prophet ﷺ. It was consolidated by Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, Hazrat Umar Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu, Hazrat Usman Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu, and Hazrat Ali Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu. And it was strengthened by Aimma Ahl Bayt, Hazrat Imam Hassan and Hazrat Imam Hussain, and up till this time and afterwards as well. How could it shatter? How it can be easily broken or demolished? It is impossible. Secondly, it is a misconception, because if we think on these lines, then Nauzubillah, we will have to conclude that Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam could not create a party. He was not successful in creating a party that could establish a system for a longer time.
Right.
It's a very basic rule of defining or judging a system, that a system must continue after the founders have gone.
Right.
It not only should continue, it must prosper. If the system of Islam created by the Holy Prophet ﷺ that got extinguished after Khilafat-e-Rashida, 28-30 years, this time is equal to nothing in the history of mankind. Compare it with socialism and communism.
Right.
People agree that it continued for 70 years at least, and the system created by the Holy Prophet that terminated after 28-30 years, it is unimaginable. Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam created the purest party, the strongest party, the party having intellect, having insight and practical potential to create a system and establish it and to make it continued.
Right.
So we cannot accept this. And thirdly, if the practical worth of the system of Islam is such as it could not survive for more than 30 years, or like, how can we present it to humanity?
Right.
How can we claim that it is a system till useful till the day of judgment?
Right,
In the
sir.
present times, we start judging the governments or regimes after 100 days only, and this is the system that could not continue more than 30 years, and 14th centuries, for 14th centuries it could not be established again.
Right, sir, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, sir. I think a very important thing which we must not miss during the course of today's special transmission is the fact that, you know, women we've seen have played a very pivotal role, especially when it comes to the spread of Islam. And we saw this, you know, with regards to the incident of Karbala as well, and more so after, you know, it too. So in this regard, what would your comments be?
And I'm really grateful you brought that up, because with the last especially 100 years or so, we tend to ignore the role that women have played throughout Muslim history. And it's sad, because we are wasting out not only on at least half the population as a human resource, we also fail to recognize not just the sacrifices but the services.
Right.
Because sacrifices are fewer, but services are many.
Right.
So the women of the house of Sayyidina Hussain, these women are not just examples of piety, of chastity, of knowledge,
Of bravery,
and of
sir.
teaching, but of courage to stand shoulder to shoulder and face the oppressor with as much bravery as any man next to them.
Right, and without any man supporting them, as we did see.
So what we like to impose upon them as the what we call the weaker, you know, sex or the weaker gender is not really that weak, is it?
Right,
And
sir.
these women, which were along with them, and not just these women, but women like them,
Yes.
throughout history have played an important role in our society, its development, and yes, if need be, to stand firm before the oppressor.
Right, and I think, sir, this is something which is very relevant for women today, because I think the message that we learn as women today is also then to stand very steadfast against oppression, against social injustice. And I think if not anything, this should motivate us, because, you know, Islam, if you see it as a religion, it was one of the very first religions which gave women that right to actually seek a khula. So Islam has been very pro-women, it has been very progressive, and I think this is something which the women of today must learn from as well. On which, sir, I'll come to you, I think, talking about, you know, instilling the values, the lessons that we learned from Karbala into children today. How precisely do you feel can parents do the same?
First of all, the parents must teach their children to be concentrated. Social media is a distraction. There is unbound influx of information, futile and useful information, both. How to choose? The parents must tell them. They must try to develop their intellect, and this job cannot be done by all the parents, because all the parents are not that much educated. So this is the responsibility of the teachers and intellectuals in society, that they must give some central idea, central ideology, central thought to the children. If they try to develop their intellect, that is the ability to analyze. So the children will develop their faculties of mind and spirit as well, to pick the useful information and analyze it correctly, and concentrate their efforts for positive outcomes, for positive role in society. The first role is that of man of contemplation, and the second role is that is man of that is that of man of action.
Right.
The first period is that of contemplation. The children must study deep, must develop the ability to analyze the things, and then they will be able to play their practical role in practical life, and that role should be international, for humanity, for abolition of unfair socio-economic and political systems.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which, sir, I'll come to you, and coming towards the conclusion of the show, to quote this, very famous saying which says that your wisdom is not complete until unless you advocate for someone else's right. So, when we talk about, implementing this principle today, since we are talking about the lessons that we've learned from Karbala, how precisely do you feel can we do the same?
I think that the sunnah of the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the teaching of it, and him being, of course, the practical example, a demonstration of it, and moving on all the way to a great milestone of Muslim history of Sayyidina Hussain, he being the professor of the ultimate sacrifice for mankind and for truth and justice. I think what Muslims need to do, and I'll especially take you here because a lot of our audience, I believe, lives around the world, in foreign countries, in countries where Muslims are of a minority status. So what main thing we can do is to be the face of Islam, being a living example through our behavior, through the way we deal with others, through the way we interact with our neighbors, as model citizens of whatever society we live in, as people who will stand up for justice and the rights of others. They may be non-Muslims even. So if you live in, say, the West, and you see an injustice to, say the black community or to any other community, I think people like ourselves should stand up as Muslims, so that we do not become just a spectator of history, and not just a spectator of the event of Karbala, but actually people who will live by the principles that he sacrificed himself for. Also, I would like to add to the esteemed doctor's statement that when we talk about misconceptions, a very important issue is raised by Orientalists and our young and old people who now we interact all the time, social media, with all kinds of people in the world. And they like to project this, that within the sacrifice of Hussain was in itself his personal success, but that impact that he wanted to bring to society, was that really achieved? So Orientalists, critics of Islam, would like to often take up this point with Muslims and young people who are not so well versed in the Islamic theology, would always often at times say that we have no answer for this. So I'm going to give them the answer for this. The very fact that he and his family gave up their lives for truth in itself is the greatest success, not just in the spiritual sense, but also in the worldly and material sense, because they formed the standard that we are not going to submit to falsehood no matter what.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which, sir, I'll come to you, and to conclude today's show, what would your message be for the youth, more so in terms of, learning from the incident of Karbala, that how practically can they keep it in front of them and, aspire to become more empowered individuals and, those kind of individuals which then carry on with the legacy?
First of all, I would advise the youth to learn the parameters of studying history. Don't get misled by reading the narrations in the books of history. Learn the parameters of analyzing history. That is an essential part of your knowledge and study and education. Secondly, I would say that in general they must develop their intellect, and intellect I generally describe as the skill to see deeper, as the skill to read between the lines, and as the skill to derive lessons from the past, analyze the present and peep into the future. So I would advise the youth to develop these qualities in them. Don't make, I would say, your opinions on the basis of the headlines of newspapers or just news items on TVs and hearsay. Go deeper, analyze the things, and then you will be able to develop your potential to lead the nations. Yu'til hikmata man yasha wa man yu'tal hikmata faqad utiya khayran kathira. This is intellect that is the biggest blessing. And presently I would say our tragedy is tragedy of the third world nations, and our tragedy is that we have lost intellect. So, I would say that develop intellect.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which, sir, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much, Saeed sir, for being here with us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about not only the incident of Karbala itself, but also the very important lessons that we do learn from it, not only as Muslims, but also as human beings per se. In this regard, it is very important for us to remember the fact that we need to be patient, we need to be just, we need to be compassionate, and we need to always stand up for what is right. And by that virtue also, you know, stand up against adversity or, you know, wrong things whenever they may arise, you know, in that regard. And in this regard, we must also remember the fact that, you know, as is very famously said, that death with dignity is always better than a life which is full of humiliation. Thank you for watching today's special transmission. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.